Welcome everybody to the 22nd Association for Heterodox Economics conference, and as you are all aware, this year's conference is online due to COVID-19. We are today in our session going to look at the topic of COVID-19, and the topic we have is heterodox perspectives on COVID-19. Just a few points that we need to be aware of as attendees. First of all, we need to know that the session is going to be recorded, but it will only be the video and the audio of the panelists that will appear. Attendees' mics are muted and your video is off and won't be recorded. However, if you have a question which you would like to put to any of the panelists, can you please type it in the Q&A section that is in the bottom of your screen. If you would like if you're having any technical difficulties or any question that you would like not related to the topics discussed, perhaps technical difficulties with your computer or something, if you can please put that in the chat, and then our tech support co-chair will be able to respond to your query. When it comes to the end of the talks, we are going to invite you to ask questions. I'm afraid that if you have comments to make about the content, there probably will not be time to read those comments out, although the questions, we hope that we will be able to answer everyone that has a question. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Medha, who is from the Center for Economic and Social Studies in Hyderabad, India. And her topic is going to be heterodox economic policy, a proven boon at the time of a global pandemic. So.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
You are perhaps a bit louder.
Okay. You can see my present PPT.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello everyone. I'm Medha. I'm a PhD scholar from Center for Economics and Economic and Social Studies, Hyderabad. Thank you, Association of Heterodox Economics, for this opportunity. And I also thank everyone who's listening to this right now. Now I'll move on to my presentation. The title, as you can see, is Heterodox Economic Policy Outlook, a proven boon at the time of a global pandemic. All through the conference, we'll be listening to excellent talks about a global perspective of heterodox economics. And I would like to humbly contribute a very local perspective inspired from the southern state of India, called Kerala. The socio-economic scenario caused by the global pandemic COVID-19 has shown that there was an undeniable fault in the way we were carrying out our economy. In this critical situation, a paradigm shift that is less capitalistic and more humane in nature is inevitable, that would be capable to redefine the fundamental way of looking at the world. In this slide, I'm trying to analyze how a poverty eradication program of Indian state Kerala called Kudumbashree has an influential hand in helping the state in the phase of COVID-19 fight. The study tries to analyze the activities of Kudumbashree at the time of the lockdown and how programs like Kudumbashree can be a model. So on 31st December, China reported a cluster of cases of pneumonia in Wuhan, which can be marked as the beginning of the change the world was going to witness. On 30th January, India reported its first case, and on 11th, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And on 24th March, Government of India declared its first part of nationwide lockdown, limiting the movement of 1.3 billion people, which include informal sector workers that constitute more than 80% of the Indian economy. The lockdown was criticized widely for its unpreparedness, as the migrant laborers were not provided any mode of transportation. And unemployment in India rose from 6.7% on 15th March to 26% on 19th April. More than 45% of Indian household witnessed an income drop compared to the previous year. The policy responses of the government of India was highly criticized because of its inefficiency. But on the other hand, few state governments, especially few South Indian states, were not worthily responsible towards the citizens, and policy response was timely and benefiting. Now, let's come to Kerala. Kerala, which has always been celebrated worldwide because of its alternative model of development with a remarkable accomplishment in human development, and it has also proved it again with its policy response to be a model in COVID-19 resilience. India's first case was reported in Kerala on 30th January, and from there, Kerala has been showing exceptional stories of fighting the virus, reducing the death tolls and infection rate compared to most of the other states in India. Kerala saw its policies, which was focused on poverty eradication, welfare, strong local governments, which became added strength during the fight against the pandemic. And Kerala's biggest poverty eradication program, called Kudumbashree, proved to be an indispensable resource in the face of COVID-19 fight of Kerala. Now, let's talk about Kudumbashree. Kudumbashree was set up in 1997 by the State Poverty Eradication Mission. The name Kudumbashree in Malayalam language means prosperity of family. It is essentially a community network that covers the entire state of Kerala, comprising women self-help groups under the theme poverty eradication and women empowerment. So it is worth mentioning that Kudumbashree's activities has also helped Kerala in fighting the flood it faced in 2018. So there are lots of literature like that studied Kudumbashree, but here we discuss the potential model Kudumbashree could be in the COVID-19 resilience. So Kudumbashree's activities are done through 3 levels of community-based organization of women, that is neighborhood level, the neighborhood groups, area level, the area development societies, and at panchayat level, the community development societies. Any woman, irrespective of social or economic status, are welcome to join the group, which ensures wide participation. It has various projects under several names that aims at different strategies like destitute rehabilitation, capability development, thrift and microcredit, financial inclusion, crisis management, tribal development, etc. So the program has 44.91 lakh members that covers more than 50% of the households in the state. So this is a model I have derived from the COVID-19 activities of Kudumbashree. I'll explain each of it and then come back to the model later too. So under converging, during the lockdown, Kerala ensured that nobody should go hungry or pushed towards starvation in the state. 1,114 community kitchens were started by Kudumbashree, out of which 379 were budget hurdles of Kudumbashree. So, like Kudumbashree has a project of women farmers through joint liability groups. Though the lockdown had affected the joint liability groups, more than 16,268 JLGs across the state have stood together and donated around 115.94 metric tons of agriculture commodities for the community kitchens. So the lockdown disconnects people. The communication is the important key to ensure an effective response from the people to contain the pandemic. Kudumbashree has formed like 1.9 lakh social media groups with 22 lakh MHG members to educate them and their families about the government's instructions regarding the protocols to stay safe and reduce the community spreading. So there was huge demand for masks, sanitizers, etc. at the time of the lockdown. And instead of depending on other sources, Kerala found the solution in Kudumbashree itself. Kudumbashree has prepared and sold more than 47 lakh cotton masks through around 306 tailoring units. And it has prepared more than 6.3 thousand liters of sanitizers too. So also they have started to make face shields and protective gears that can be useful for medical staff. So when the world is going through this unusual times, that affects the mental health of everyone that has to go through this. So there are 1.54 lakh destitute families in Kerala with 1.14 lakh elderly members who are under the vulnerable population category. To reach out to them, Kudumbashree has entitled 2,176 resource person, where they contact them every 5 days and inquire about their health needs, etc. Kudumbashree through its 360 community counselors also provide counseling and mental support to those who are suffering because of various issues due to lockdown. The most important thing now is an exit strategy from the lockdown to ensure economic empowerment to people, as many had lost jobs, and especially in Kerala, many have come back from foreign countries losing their jobs. So government has declared many loan schemes and employment schemes for these people. So since there is already a network created by Kudumbashree, the scheme has become easy to execute. This would improve the access to credit for people who are in need of it, and it will increase the demand. Any resilience will not be complete if the negative effects of the disaster on the existing programs are not properly taken care of. So Kudumbashree is striving to continue their ongoing schemes. For example, it has changed. They have the skill development programs, and it have been changed to online. Kerala is a state which have swiftly and decisively kept their death rates and infection rates down. We have seen that Kudumbashree, with its extensive activities, have played a major role in this. Kerala could not do this because of its sprung into action immediately, but because of the path of development process of years leading up to it. Like decades of investment in universal healthcare, along with the devolution of government, which give power and responsibility to the local government, which has proved to be a powerful tool in the resilience of COVID-19 pandemic. From this, we have seen that Kudumbashree has proven to be a backbone of an effective local governments in the state at the time of a pandemic. So as Kudumbashree is also based on sustainable development goals, it has been a tool for Kerala for achieving them to a larger extent. Kerala also ranked first among the states of India in Sustainable Development Index of 2019. In order to compare, have a brief comparison about different states in COVID-19 resilience, their respective Sustainable Development Goal scores of 2019, and the average doubling days of the number of cases of COVID-19, which has been taken as a proxy for COVID-19 resilience. So 12 states are taken for their comparison, 6 states which have highest number of cases, and 6 with the lowest number of cases as on 27th April 2020. Please note that. So from the table, we could infer that there is a positive correlation between average doubling days of COVID-19 cases and the SDG scores of the states. From this, we could understand that the state which have been trying to move in a heterodox people-centric development path have been safer in COVID-19 fight if we take the average doubling days as a proxy for the resilience. So coming back to this model, the fast and wide reach of the policies by the government has made possible by the 6 C's derived from the Kudumbashree's activities that can be claimed as a powerful model of people-centric crisis management. Converging, as in bringing together the community and working to meet the immediate needs of the society, and connecting us to reach everyone to create awareness, and caring us to give support to vulnerable population, capability enhancing us, economic empowerment of people by providing credit support. Continuing means focusing on already existing scene, overcoming the challenges. This Kudumbashree model of resilience is a potential development model towards a humanitarian development path and heterodox path of development. We have seen that this heterodox path of development leads to a stronger resilient state at the face of any crisis. So, as we always say, any crisis is an opportunity to improve. Kerala as a consumer state might go into food crisis post COVID-19, but if rightful measures is taken to improve farming and food production, it can also attain self-sufficiency through an expansion of JLG-based group farming. Kudumbashree, which has a vast reach and community strength, can work as micro enterprises, understanding the demand of the global market. It could improve the scope as small units of production of various products that have high demand in the market. This can add toward the exit strategy of the state. Inspiring from Kudumbashree, its model can be applied in other states as a model of crisis management, as well as for attaining sustainable development goal, which is to be prioritized for a better egalitarian development. So we could see that localization, community participation, and feminization of development process is proven to be boon at the fighting the challenges caused by the pandemic. Kudumbashree has proven to be one of the biggest strengths of Kerala model development. Though there are challenges, its commitment and competence have given an example for other states too. With activities that can be sorted into a model with namely converging, connecting, caring, creating, capability enhancing, and continuing, Kudumbashree has shown that an alternative path of development or crisis management is not implausible. It has also seen that the more you're focusing on attaining sustainable development goals through various strategies, the more you're capable of combating the pandemic, any pandemic, with the resilience. So instead of focusing on accumulative development path, moving towards a heterodox path of development can promise a safe, secure, and decent life even at the time of the crisis. This has been proven by Kudumbashree and Kerala. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Meeta. Okay, we are going to move to our second speaker, Vijayamba. And Vijayamba is a PhD student and at the Indian Statistical Institute, and she is going to talk to us on the reach of fiscal stimulus to the urban female informal workers in Bengaluru during the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for that introduction. Am I audible?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. So firstly, I would like to thank the Association for Heterodox Economics for giving me this opportunity to present my paper on the reach of fiscal stimulus for urban women informal workers in Bangalore during COVID-19. I'm Vijayamba and I'm doing my PhD in Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. So today's presentation will be structured like this. So firstly, I'll mention the motivation for my study and state the objectives. And I would then proceed to the data that I've used in conducting the study. So I've used both secondary source of data and primary source of data. It will be followed by broad conclusions and the ongoing policy discussion. So coming to the motivation of the study. The government of India announced an abrupt lockdown during March 22nd, 2020. So during the lockdown, a large number of workers in urban areas lost their earnings and jobs. And in this, 90% of India's workforce comes from the informal sector. So as it is, the workers in informal sector are characterized with lack of social security benefits and social protection. So in the informal workers, the share of women workers is very large. So certain assessment surveys by the UN have stated that it is the women who are likely to lose their jobs and earnings first. And a certain prediction job losses by the ILO in the form of reports also have shown that the sectors like manufacturing and construction, the impact is very high. And these are the sectors that have large share of women workers. And generally in times of a pandemic, it is women who bear the huge burden of providing food and financial security to their families. Now, why I wanted to do this study in Bangalore is, so Bangalore is predominantly known for providing employment to high-end IT services. But along with that, it also provides employment to a large number of workers in manufacturing sector and also low-end services. And post-liberalization, Bangalore as a city has attracted a large number of workers to get employed in these sectors. So during this pandemic, there are few studies by research organizations and academics, scholars that have shown a massive loss of employment and earnings in the state. So keeping this background and this as the motivation of my study, I wanted to look into the reach of the food and financial security measures that are offered by the state as fiscal stimulus to the urban female informal workers in the city. So the different categories of workers that I wanted to look into are the garment workers, construction workers, and the domestic workers. So the fiscal stimulus that was broadly offered by the state was like this. So they announced to offer 5 kg of food grains per person per family in the beneficiaries that were listed, and also rupees 500 as financial stimulus for all the beneficiaries who were listed in a program, a government program called Jan Dhan. So coming to the data and methods that are used in the study. So as I already told, I have used both primary and secondary source of data. So I have used a periodic labor force survey by the National Sample Survey Office of 2017-18 to look into the urban female participation across different industries in Karnataka. And along with this, I collected primary data from urban female informal workers in Bangalore across different caste and age groups. So the interviews were largely based, like they were telephonic interviews, and some of the interviews were also done by visiting the construction sites. So the interviews were semi-structured, and the sample was based on purposive sampling, and it was done during the month of May. So since the sample is based on purposive sampling method, the findings cannot be generalized. But however, I have also relied on the surveys conducted by other research institutions during this lockdown period, which also show similar results. So coming to the nature of urban female workforce in Karnataka. So this table shows the distribution of urban female workforce in Karnataka. So we see that manufacturing has the largest share of urban female workforce, and it is a very important sector. And further dividing the manufacturing sector into different sectors shows that the manufacturing of wearing apparel and textiles employs around 53% of the urban female workforce in manufacturing. So women in garment sectors are the largest employers in the broad sector of manufacturing. And the form of employment is such that in manufacturing of wearing apparel, particularly in Karnataka, they work as self-employers also, and casual workers. The characteristics of these workers is such that only 30% of them are entitled to social security benefits, and none of them have written job contracts. Similarly, in construction sector, a large share of women workers are employed in construction of buildings, and they are also not entitled to any kind of social protection, and neither they have a written job contract. So coming to the post-COVID studies in urban India. So these are the studies that I've referred to that were conducted during the period of lockdown. So I have divided the themes into two different categories. So one set of studies speaks about the loss of employment and earnings. So these studies are conducted in different parts of the country and in Delhi too. So all these studies say that there was a massive loss of employment and earnings. The next theme of studies that I've looked into speak about the minimal reach of the fiscal stimulus. So these studies say that there was some reach of the food stimulus in the distribution of through the distribution of food grains, and the reach of the financial stimulus was even lesser or very minimal compared to the distribution of food grains. So these are the broad studies that I've looked into. Now, coming to the findings from the primary data that I have collected. So before I go into the findings, a brief mention about the socio-economic profile of the respondents. So the garment workers in my study had better years of schooling compared to the domestic workers and construction workers. So these workers earned around 8,000 to 8,500 rupees per month. And the construction workers migrated from different parts of the neighboring states for work here. And the domestic workers also worked in around 3 to 4 houses per month and earned somewhere between 7,000 to 7,500 rupees per month. And the incomes of all these women were very critical in running their houses. So the findings I have categorized into 2 themes. So firstly, I'll speak about the food security. So the broad thing that I want to mention here is that the distribution of food grains was very essential to the workers. However, the items covered were not sufficient and the reach was not complete to all the category of workers. So the domestic workers felt that the items given and the quantity was insufficient to feed the family. They had ration cards, so the number of people who were enrolled in it depended on the age of the family member. So if they were aged 10 years and above, they were usually enrolled. So one of the domestic workers said that they received 20 kg of food grains per month, and she had to feed her family thrice a day, and 20 kg of rice grains were really not sufficient to feed the family. And these domestic workers preferred distribution of food grains over cooked food because some local.
Oh dear. We will hope that there can be a reconnection. So if you bear with us for 2 or 3 minutes. Have you received a message at all, Bruce? I've just checked my system. I've not received one. Okay, unfortunately, we seem to have lost internet connection. What I think we will do is we will move on to our next speaker, but also invite Vijayamba to finish off her presentation if she's able to regain her connection. Okay, so we're going to go to our next speaker, Patrick Mellacher, who is an economist who works at the Schumpeter Center at Graz University in Austria. So over to you, Patrick.
Okay, I now unmuted me. I hope that I can be heard.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first of all, I want to say thank you for organizing this wonderful conference and the opportunity to speak about how I want to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic shapes inequality using an agent-based model. Okay, this doesn't work. Okay, so my research question is, how does the pandemic and actually used or potential containment policies shape the following interconnected dimensions with specific attention to inequalities? So first of all, health. So how many and which people become infected and die? Economy, how does output and its distribution change? And care work, how are people affected who have to do more care work? Leisure, how is the ability to fulfill one's leisure plans affected? The pandemic triggered a wave of empirical research like the one that was unfortunately cut off just about now. And I think this is very important. To name just one, besides the one that we just heard, is the COVID inequality project. However, empirical and econometric work has its limits in the current situation. First of all, there is limited policy variation, and these policies often come in bundles. Second, the outside world plays obviously a huge role in open economies, so it's hard to identify the factors at play with econometric methods. Second, if it is necessary to change the course, an ex post analysis of the results may be too late. There has also been some theoretical work, and quite a few hypotheses are pretty straightforward, for instance, voiced in 2 articles published in the Lancet Public Health. However, interactions between different factors are complex, which makes it hard to find an analytical solution to these problems. For instance, is it better to have a short and severe lockdown or a less severe but longer one? This is why I chose a model-based approach to explore these hypotheses. The predominant models to predict and explain the pandemic are SIR or SEIR compartment models. For instance, this influential study by the Imperial College, or a paper by Atkinson, who made these models very popular in mainstream economics. In these models, the population differs with regard to their epidemiological state. So they may be either susceptible or exposed, which means that they carry the virus but are not contagious yet, or infected or recovered or dead. In these models, interactions are random. This is called the homogeneous mixing assumption. Important parameters are the infectiousness and duration of the disease, as well as the number of social contacts from which the famous basic reproduction number R0 can be calculated, which theoretically tells us how many people an infected person will infect if the rest of the population is susceptible. A typical model analysis of an SIR model goes like this. School closure reduces the number of social contacts by 10%. This is basically a quote from the Imperial College study. This reduces the effective reproduction number by X, thus reducing the peak by Y, and deaths by C. My critique, which is partly shared and voiced by others, is that social contacts in real life are typically not random. Social contacts in a park do not incur the same infectiousness as social contacts at home. Policies are not modeled explicitly in these models, so it's about some abstract lockdown policy instead of really implementing, for instance, school closure. Heterogeneity of the agents in these models is strictly limited, although there is some heterogeneity in some of these models. It is, very, very limited, for instance, to 3 age groups or something, like a paper by Asimoglu. And socioeconomic effects are either completely neglected or only taken into account in a very simplified and one-sided manner. And from this kind of biased policy advice results due to the model setup. For instance, in an SIR model, in a classical SIR model, it's impossible to eliminate the virus without herd immunity, even though in the real world, this happened, for instance, in New Zealand. So this is only because the model is set up in this way. Okay, in order to address these shortcomings, I develop an integrated economic epidemiological agent-based model. This is basically a virtual economy, which is populated by virtual people and virtual firms who are known as agents. Agents differ with regard to their economic and epidemiological characteristics, which are given by class, employment, family, and family status. These agents are connected in a social network, so they basically have friends and know some locations, and act according to boundedly rational rules. The basic idea is to assume that people can become infected in one of 3 spheres, either at home, at work, or during leisure activities. Of course, in the real world, there's also something like public transport and so on. I neglect this for this model, for simplicity. Okay, in each of these spheres, people have social contacts that may cause an infection. These contacts differ with regard to their frequency. At home, you would meet other members of your household regularly, and at work, you would meet your colleagues regularly. However, interactions with customers, for instance, may be less regular. The same applies to the leisure sphere. Here you interact with some friends more often than with others. Okay, so since this is a session devoted to the question how heterodox approaches can help us to study the COVID pandemic, I want to give you a quick impression of how this model is influenced by various heterodox schools or strands of economics. The agents in this model employ boundedly rational adaptive behavior, which is common to complexity economics. The agents are divided into social classes, and the firm behavior is governed by a general rate of profit, like in classical and Marxian economics. In this model, agents have to do care work, which may constrain their ability to participate in the labor market, which is the research topic of feminist economics, of course. The model has evolutionary and Schumpeterian characteristics because it's suited to analyze a co-evolution of different spheres. And finally, the model also has Keynesian properties because wages are assumed to be sticky, and thus aggregate demand matters for employment. The model is discrete time, and each day is separated into 3 phases, which are for a worker on a typical workday devoted to home, work, and leisure. So, and it's a week from Monday until Sunday. People move to explicitly modeled places in these phases, for instance, to the workplace, to the hospital, school, home, or some leisure facility where they may become infected. The model is developed explicitly for COVID-19, so stylized facts which are important in this pandemic are modeled explicitly. For instance, the presence of intergenerational households, retirement homes, leisure facilities, etc. There are 8 types of agents, of human agents in this model. So children and teenagers are assumed all to go to school. There are white-collar workers who work in offices, blue-collar workers who work in factories, service workers who work in commercial leisure facilities, healthcare workers who work in hospitals, teachers who work in schools, pensioners who are not economically active anymore, and capitalists who collect profits from offices, factories, and commercial leisure facilities. I calibrated my model initially to German data because it's easily available. However, I plan to introduce other countries as well, and at a later stage, provide the model as an open source code in order to give other researchers the opportunity to calibrate the model to a country of their choice. So demography, household composition, observed leisure behavior, wages, employment, hospital capacities, profit over wages come from empirical data. Income of capitalists, consumption, taxes, and government spending are calibrated for a closed economy in a circular flow with a balanced budget. This is a necessity in order to verify the model. The epidemiological and medical characteristics are taken from the Imperial College, but what I still have to do is I have to calibrate the epidemiological characteristics with regard to home, work, and leisure facilities, because I think that there is a big difference, but I still have to calibrate this to real data. That's not something that can be done in one day. Okay, so as a final part of my presentation, I want to quickly give an overview of the effects of 4 different scenarios. They're all counterfactual scenarios, not actually depict the German situation. Okay, so in the decentral reaction scenario, the government does not react to the pandemic at all. But if the share of the infected is high, people want to spend more of their leisure time at home, and white-collar workers work from home. In the second scenario, symptomatic individuals will, in addition to that, self-isolate. So they will not go to work and they will not engage in leisure activities. In the third scenario, we have the decentral reaction plus school closings. And in the fourth scenario, we close down the commercial leisure facilities. In this scenario, service workers are compensated, but leisure facility capitalists not. So obviously this is just a start, a very quick start in order to give you an impression how something like this works. I set up the model with fixed random seeds. So in the beginning, there are 10 different populations who all face the same scenarios. And yeah, here you basically see these simulations, some preliminary results. So in red, you see the results for decentral reaction. Here you see that basically a lot of people, if we stick it to German data, it would be around 500,000 people would be sacrificed for the sake of GDP. So you see that mortality rate is highest at this. I don't know if you see my pointer. So this in the upper left part is the mortality rate, and this in the bottom right part is a cumulative GDP loss. So here you see that the red one causes the mortality rate to be highest, but the GDP loss to be lowest. Okay, self-isolation helps a little bit, but only slightly. Also, we must face the fact that in the real world, many people have an incentive not to self-isolate themselves, and this actually was a big problem in Germany and in Austria, because if they self-isolate, they won't get paid. In green, we have this decentral reaction plus commercial leisure facility closings. Here we see that the mortality rate would be the lowest of these simple scenarios, but the GDP loss would be the highest. I'm sorry. And you see that what's quite interesting is that the income Gini, which you see here, it's virtually unchanged for the decentral reaction scenarios, goes down quite a lot in the beginning because the leisure facility capitalists are not compensated for their losses. So yeah, basically their income goes down more than the income of the workers. Okay, and the final scenario is decentral reaction plus school closing. Here you see that it helps also a little bit, but it's not entirely clear if it's better than a self-isolation scenario. But we see that the GDP loss is much higher because those people who have to do care work cannot go to work, or they work less efficiently because they work from home and at the same time have to take care of their kids. And they also have lower income, so the income Gini goes up because those people suffer more from the pandemic. Okay, so work to do and outlook. So first of all, I want to set up better scenarios, and I want to calibrate the scenarios to real data, and analyze them quantitatively via these Monte Carlo simulations. Also, I have to say that each sphere could be improved quite drastically. For instance, the economy could feature innovation, heterogeneous industries and goods. The medical sphere, a triage, which may improve outcome, and other medical problems and diseases which compete at the same time. Care work, make gender explicit, and social norms. And leisure industry, where you could implement a certain evolution of preferences for leisure activities. For instance, I maybe would like to go to the opera house very often, but if I cannot afford it I wouldn't try it very often. Okay, so thank you for your attention. I hope that I was able to give you a quick impression of this model. I hope to release a working paper in the mid or till end of July. And you can follow updates at Twitter. And if you want to collaborate with me on one of the topics that I wrote or any other topics, please write me an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm pleased to report that we now have Vijayamba back. She's had her connection restored. So it's difficult to obviously have your presentation split, but well done, Vijayamba. So please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for that sudden power cut and stop in internet connection. So I was talking about the lack of food security to the construction workers. So they did not have work and wages for 50 days. So some of them borrowed money from their owners, and some of them resorted to the food given by the volunteer groups in the localities. However, they were unsure of getting their meals, whether once or twice. So it was a tough time for them that way. And the garment workers in the study purchased groceries from the fair price shops. Just a second. Yeah. So yeah, they purchased food grains from the fair price shops at lower prices. However, they did not receive their salaries during the month of lockdown, and they resorted to purchasing lesser quantities of food because some of the prices of food also had increased. And the women in the study struggled really hard to feed their kids during the pandemic. Like one of the workers also mentioned that she had to pick rotten vegetables, and sometimes she had to eat less to feed their kids. So the second aspect of the findings is about the financial security. So the broad aspect that I want to stress here is that the amount given by the government was very meager to meet the day-to-day living expenses, and most of them did not have accounts itself in the prescribed program. In that, one of the workers received rupees 500, and it was really not sufficient to meet the expenses. So the domestic workers, for them, some of the employers paid salaries for the first month, and some of them did not get it for the second month, and they struggled hard to pay their utility bills and rents. So they lived in rented houses, which was in the range of rupees 4,500 to 6,000, and most of them resorted to informal sources of lending to meet their expenses. The construction workers did not have accounts in the government program. Some of them tried even getting their accounts done during this period, but they were rejected by the officers repeatedly to get their identity cards. And even if they got so, they could not complete the process, and they were asked to come again, and the workers gave up after the futile attempts. So these construction workers received money in the range of 1,000 or 2,000 per week per family to meet their expenses, and they were uncertain about the terms of repayment. The garment workers in the study received half of their salaries in the first month of the lockdown, and for some of them, work resumed in the second month. But however, they were afraid of being sacked from work because the production in different factories had really stooped low. So to conclude the study, what I want to stress is that these for these workers, the social protection before the lockdown itself was very low, and the pandemic has made their lives even vulnerable. So the distribution of food grains reached some of the workers, but it was not wide enough to cover everybody, and the items covered was very less. So this study argues on the existing argument that the distribution of food grains need to be universal, and the items covered should be much broader. And concerning the financial security, very few of them availed it, and the amount given was very meager to meet the expenses of the workers. So there's an urgent need, to lift up the cash transfers to at least rupees 5,000 to 6,000, and it needs to be given for 3 months to meet the consumer demand. And in cities now, for these workers, there's a risk of their livelihoods, because particularly in big cities, people perceive domestic workers as the carrier of this infection, and there are digital advertisements for electronic appliances which are endorsing this. So some of them have been sacked out of work, and domestic workers unions are on streets protesting their work and wages. Similarly, garment workers are being asked to they're laid off because of the extreme low production, and they're unable to meet the salaries for their workers, and they are also protesting in different parts of the state to get their salaries and get their work back. So academicians in different parts of the country are arguing for a gender centric policy, and this study extends this argument by saying that there needs to be a distinct outlook for rural and urban women, and there has to be a universal public distribution system, an urban employment guarantee program, and also an immediate need of cash transfer for all the beneficiaries, and it needs to be collated with different government records like ration cards, house listings in the socio-economic surveys, etc. So I would like to conclude with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vijayamba. Can I please remind the attendees to put your questions that you might have for her, and also for Patrick, our previous speaker, into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We're now going to turn to Professor Alicia Girón, who has a long association with the Association for Heterodox Economics, and she is from the National University in Mexico, also involved with the International Association for Feminist Economics, and also a researcher at the Economic Research Institute. So thank you, Alicia.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really very happy to be here with the Heterodox, something happened to my, with the Association of Heterodox Economics, where I have been many times, and hopefully this is a great moment to continue with our heterodox thinking. Well, first of all, I would like the thing that I am going to where we have been working about the financial governance in a multipolar world. So I'm going to give you the definitions, and then I'm going to, one of the things that I have been working, and I have tell in all the webinars that we have had here in Mexico and with other organizations, is that it is very important to know that Wuhan and COVID-19 is not the one who triggers the financial and the economic crisis that we are having. What I am going to show you in the next tables and graphics that I have prepared for this conference is that we have really a big problem that was explicit by the financial governments and especially by the central banks. Well, first of all, how do we define financial governance defines as the self-regulated space for the participation of institutions, investors, and economic agents generate profits under an endogenous pattern determined by the central banks through interest rate management, on the assumption that the generated profits respond to a behavior pattern that characterized by zero interest variation of money, credit, and stable growth rates. The foundation of financial instability will deepen and the fragility of financial circles will become evident in the face of any adversity. So the objective is straight. The enormous corporate and sovereign debt that countries reached within the framework of the economic policies implemented by central banks during the Great Recession period before the arrival of COVID-19. So this is
Alicia, you've muted your computer.
okay. Well, so the fragility and instability of financial markets and the asymmetry between financial assets and GDP not only manifested a speculative bubble, but also announced a financial and economic crisis by the end of the second decade of this century. So from 2008, 2009, central banks applied fiscal incentives and counter-cycle monetary policies, which at the juncture were classified as the Keynesian moment. But the economic growth reached until before 2006 was fading when a sample of structured finance or the so-called subprime mortgages collapsed together with a large overdue portfolios, which put that too big to fail, too big to rescue banks in frank weakness. This is how the years of the Great Moderation, a long period of stability, end, along with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, with the revival of the International Monetary Fund and the international financial organizations. So the central banks' incentives, it was thought, will help rebound the global economy. On the contrary, the Keynes moment lasted only for a brief period. With the rebirth of the first green shoots in the economy, central banks initiated austerity. Sustained growth rates were not achieved even despite the large central bank's emergency programs to salvage the economy from deflation. The emerging countries, among which China, India, and Brazil, stand out, continue to grow, but like developed countries, they gradually fade on the global map. So central banks focus on returning to austerity. In fact, the participants in financial governments themselves criticize the speculative nature of financial governance by describing that in the aftermath of the many in the world of financial governance have argued that the financial sector has grown too big, that many of its activities have little or even negative social value, and that the productivity and efficiency of the world economy could be improved if the financial sector were to shrink. That the Great Financial Crisis was based on financial innovation and the growth of the profits of the financial industry generated in the global financial market. Indeed, austerity and inflation targets, as well as zero interest rate, caused a decade of low international growth, sowing the foundations of the crisis unimaginable proportions. The years after the Great Crisis caused the age of secular stagnations. In the decade of the Great Recession, the relationship between central banks and bondholders or stakeholders of institutional corporations in the international financial system was estranged, therefore deepening the financialization process. In other words, that the relationship between the central bank and the bondholders is confirmed in Keynes' words when he mentions that our reason for supposing that there is such a special connections are arise from the fact that, broadly speaking, the banking system and the monetary utility are dealers in money and debts and not in assets or consumables. On the one hand, corporate and sovereign debt exceeded the limits concerning many countries' GDP. On the other hand, the lack of fiscal policy based on social spending for well-being, the implemented measures to face COVID-19 pandemic triggered a global crisis, a growing invasion of overdue portfolios in banking systems, and the expansion of public deficits, which were promoted by the central banks to avoid an economic collapse. As stated by Kristalina Georgieva, it is a crisis like no other and much deeper than the Great Depressions of 1929. This is how low interest, years of low interest rates and easy credit have allowed companies across the board to borrow big, building a record 10 trillion mountain of debt. Lenders expect that the vast majority of the money will be repaid on time. Countries' enormous corporate and sovereign debt acquired by financial agents because of the policies of the central banks looking to maintain close rates to obtain speculative profits in the stock markets. The relationship between austerity policies and the reduction of public spending through self-regulated markets provoked that the money destined for social benefits was useful in maintaining, as you can see. Look between 2000, how it has increased the debt in China just before it was, just before the crisis. It was 143.9. This is in dollars, and it increased just before 2019 more than 250% of GDP. Japan, well, Japan always has had more or less the same average, but in the United States, you can see how it has increased, especially the non-financial credit, the indebtedness that all these corporations are doing. And the euro is also incredible financial corporations. So as this is a chart, because I think this is very interesting, how it also has increased only the total credit to the non-financial sector between 28 and 2009. It's a lot. It has increased a lot, the percentage of the credit of the non-financial sectors, and you can see how it grows to 250% of the GDP. In the next chart, in the next graphic, it's also this is in the corporate vulnerabilities in the global vulnerability that we have right now. You have here Italy, Spain, China, and look how it has gone to the United States. And this will increase, especially with the programs of the fiscal policy that at least USA has put in the economy to more than $2.2 trillion. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that COVID-19 manipulation of the financial assets of the main corporations at the moment when the financial markets collapse, and on the other, the payment of the sovereign debts was infeasible. Stated this fact at the 2 weeks ago, the IMF has already developed how we are going to decrease There are countries that they are decreasing countries, especially Brazil and Mexico, and other emerging countries. But the country that hasn't decreased is China. So this will be less. We have
Oh dear, okay. Alicia, are you there?
Yes, yes, I am here.
You've broken up quite a little bit as you were concluding. The computer reception, the signal was
I have
lost.
already finished.
Would you like to go through your concluding
Yes.
paragraph, concluding slide again?
Well, I was in the conclusion.
Yes.
And that COVID-19 arrived. On the one hand, there was an immediate deflation of the financial assets of the, and on the other, the payment of the sovereign debts was invisible. And the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund stated this fact at the 2020 spring meetings. But I'm going to stop here to share and the problem is that of all the worst policies, economic policies that during the last decade has been mandated by the central banks. Zero interest, enough of credit, low, stable economy. And when I said to my students, stay go to hospital, and they said, even you are dying, the doctor is going to be, your patient is stable. So that's how our economy has been during the last 10 years. And now we affront a really high problem because it is not that COVID is the scanner of this body in education and less investment in the health sector. And it is incredible, the access to water. It's incredible how, at least in Mexico, all the days they said, wash your hands. And you have to be more than 1 minute washing your hands. And the question is if if in other countries, in the rural areas, even in the peripheral urban areas, you have water. So all the austerity policies that improve the profits of the see, for example, the pandemic was declared, the Dow Jones were around 28,000 points, and then it decreased less than 10,000 until 18. Well, that will be all my, thank you very much.
Simon, you're muted.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, I muted. Thank you, Bruce. I muted there to hopefully improve the quality of Alicia's talk. But so we now have a time of questions. And if you haven't put a question and you'd like to put one to the panelists, please put it into the Q&A section. I think we're going to start with the first question. And also, we hopefully will be able to give the panelists, the other panelists also, to have an opportunity to respond to the question. So the first question is for, hang on a second. Right. A question for Ms. Medha. Thanks for the presentation. One of the striking features of the Kerala model is that it operates at a sub-state level. Do you see this as a transferable model of localism, which may be valid for other countries and contexts?
Okay, as I've told in discussion as well, Kerala with its model have proved that community participation can do wonders, and also it is more democratic in nature, and its significance it is significant because it ensures the welfare as it ensures a wide reach wide reach of the policies, and large countries and developing countries can definitely benefit from a localized perspective of governance, and it is important, it is already time we think differently, and take examples from successful models, and of course it can't be done in a day or two. It take years of investment in such strategies, and I think it's possible for other contexts and other countries, but it is a matter of priorities. That is what I think, and of course the strategies might be different, but it is plausible. That is what I think. I hope I answered it.
Thank you, Alicia. If I can perhaps abuse the chair position a bit, do you think maybe the socialist political culture or the institutions of Kerala might have helped to facilitate the success that they have seen in the pandemic?
That's a question for Medha.
Yes, a question for Medha. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Do you think the socialist political culture in Kerala and some of the institutional practices might have helped in the success that they have experienced in the pandemic?
Yes, of course, sure it have. The years of investment in education, the priorities was people's participation and investment in education, localization, the dividing, giving power to the localization. Yes, of course, there are many other different strategies that have helped Kerala, and the Kudumbashree as a poverty eradication mission, it is one of the biggest poverty eradication the whole India itself. So it has stayed as a backbone, and yes, the social structure is all because of all these strategies.
Thank you. So we'll move to another question from Kul Deng. This is for Vijayamba. Which policies should developing economies enact which differ from developed economies, which will mitigate the impact of COVID-19? And should there be any separate policies perhaps for urban and rural sectors?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So as I said, there needs to be a distinct set of policies for urban and rural women during this pandemic. But however, the distribution of food grains through the universal public distribution system and cash transfers, and also urban employment guarantee programs are something that is needed for everybody. However, the nature of work in the urban employment guarantee program will be slightly different for rural women. And also for rural women, the most important problem that they have faced during the pandemic is in the sectors of crop production, livestock raising, and sericulture, particularly in the state of Karnataka. So this was the time of harvest, and people could not get their produce to the market. So in crop production, there's an urgent need to provide more than the minimum support prices in order to protect the workers engaged in crop production. Similarly, in dairying, the prices of milk per liter went down by rupees 2 or 3 in different parts of the state. So the women workers in dairying, need to be supported. Similarly, in sericulture, that is the raising of silkworms, the workers also have faced a loss of rupees 200 or 300 per kg of cocoons. So the work issues faced by the women workers in rural sectors and urban sectors are completely different. So these are the different kinds of policies that developing economies have to look into. So I hope I have answered the question.
Thank you. So I have another question from Tom Lyons, which is addressed for Medha, but also he would like to invite the other panelists to speak too. And the question is, do we consider, or why are so many developed countries, especially have been so much, why have Europe and North America been so less, why have so many of the developed countries, especially in Europe and North America, been so much less successful in tackling the pandemic than other places like Kerala, Vietnam, and some African countries? So, would any panelists like to address that question?
Do you want me to answer?
Thank you, Alicia.
Well, one of the things that I know is that it is a fight between the market economy and the economy of life. And what is the economy of life? The economy of life is a package where you have a you can have the supply, then medicines to give them all that you need to survive.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. It's a little bit difficult with your connection. So I'm going to move on to the next question from Diego Polanco. And this is for Patrick. How do you imagine your agent-based model? So how do you imagine your agent-based model, including the problem of informality, which characterized the developing world? I.e. workers who do not have the benefits to stay at home and need to get out and work.
Yes. If you don't have a supply, you don't have you can have the supply for a very well health system to give them the opportunity to they can go to the hospitals. And that is why many governments it is increasing a lot, the people that are passing away in these countries more than in the developed countries. And I think that's it, because you need economy to continue working, so you don't have worse recession that you are having right now. One of the problems that after this COVID-19 scan shows us, if we even if we to complete Latin America is going to be worse decade, just even worse than the decade of this. Well, that will be maybe I answer your question of pro-life and the
Alicia, I think we're going to have to move to the next question because of the very poor reception. So Diego Polanco, the question also raises the issue of universal basic income, and perhaps this question can go to Vijayamba, who talked quite a bit about the shocking level of support for the large quantity of informal workers in India. And do you think that a universal basic income or some direct cash transfer policy could be included in order to improve the circumstances and prevent stagnant or declining economic activity?
Yeah, thank you for this question. The current issue is such that different section of workers are demanding cash transfers. And there are various needs of healthcare workers and workers from different sectors to be met. But from the different reports and ongoing discussion, I think developing countries would not be able to meet the need of a universal basic income at this point of time. But however, there's a huge need for direct cash transfer, and that would be feasible given that the beneficiaries are identified through different sources, like different methods of registration with the government and house listings from different socio-economic surveys and local government bodies. So I think direct cash transfer for at least the next 3-4 months would be possible and the need of the hour.
Thank you. We have a question for Alicia, and I hope that you have a good connection. Is it possible for Latin American countries to get out of this crisis without submitting policies that are proposed by the IMF? Could you please perhaps give some examples of public policies for work in this?
Well, one of the policies that at least I'm going to talk from Mexico is that the government hasn't tried to renegotiate the external debt of our external debt, the service of the external debt. So we are continue paying, and at the same time, every day the president announced less employment and is closing less public offices. So his flag is austerity policies, and he has canceled an airport, he has canceled a lot of private investments, and also he is canceling to give a financial support to one of our biggest airplane companies. So in Mexico is incredible what we are having. It's like a neoliberal project of austerity. At the same time, they are having a lot of transfers for the social people. But the key to improve development and a sustainable development is to bring more employment. And we don't have a program of full employment right now. It's terrible. Simon.
Thank you, Alicia. Just been reminded that we need to go to Patrick to give Patrick an opportunity to answer the question about the agent-based model. Patrick?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you a lot for this question, Diego. I actually thought about including this. This is not only a problem in developing countries, but also in developed countries, so-called developed countries, as I mentioned with Germany and Austria. So precarity is a big issue, and I hope to include this. And yeah, I think that we could do this in a way that you mentioned. So that you have a certain sickness pay in order to incentivize workers to stay at home if they're really sick. This is, of course, a matter of financial constraints in other parts of the world. About the other question about Africa, I'm sorry, but I do not feel competent to answer this.
Yes, thank you. I'll just read out what that question was if the attendees haven't got that question, which is, bear with me, I've just got to find it. Yes, what is Patrick's opinion on the COVID-19 policies that African countries have enacted, and is it working? So we have another question from Thomas Lambert. I would imagine in Mexico, this will be for Alicia, I would imagine in Mexico, as in Peru, the size of the informal economy makes things difficult. That is, so many people self-employed and needing income. Alicia?
Yes, that's true. The formal economy is between the 52% of
We're losing Alicia. Would any of the other panelists like to comment about the informal sector?
Yes. Yes.
Alicia, you're back. Good.
Every time I answer, the internet closed my.
I know. It's
maybe
so
it's the government. Maybe it's the president that he doesn't want me to talk. Well, no. Really the problem is that it was incredible when everybody has to. We have been doing home office, but they said that they were workers that they just can't go to home, and those are the formal workers, especially not only, for example, the people that are giving the gas, whatever, but it was really a problem, and we have spread, the coronavirus has spread a lot. People, especially city where are zones that people works, and also we have the Mexican families are they live families in the same home, so that is one of the worst problems that we have. But the health system has decreased, the investment in the health decreased since the last 10 years, and especially with this government, has decreased a lot, the investment in health schools. So. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. So moving on to another question for Vijayamba from Sivawi Malana. Thank you for your presentation. My question, do you by any chance consider the reach of the government relief towards migrant workers? And if so, is there a relationship between migrant status and access to social protection?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So the construction workers in my study were migrant workers. So they migrated for work from different neighboring parts of the state. And yeah, so all these workers did not have any kind of social protection. In fact, few of them asked me how to get, registered with any government body. When I inquired whether they were registered workers, then only they were entitled to receive some minimum amount during the pandemic. So the construction workers were migrant workers and they did not have social protection. And those who were stranded in the city could not actually go back to their places. So during the abrupt lockdown, few of them managed to go back to their places and suffered a lot of problems during the way because of transport hurdles. And in fact, quite number of them, died on the way when they resorted to methods like walking, etc. So to just say that basically the construction workers were the migrant workers and they did not have any social protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have a remaining 5 minutes, and I would like to give an opportunity for any of the panelists to ask questions to other panelists or just raise topics for everyone to discuss. So would anyone like to come forward with a question? Okay, well, I have one then. For Alicia, I'd like you mentioned a little bit about difficulty in servicing international debt obligations and perhaps also with any currency volatility that might be existing during this COVID period. Would you like to make a bit of a comment about international debt service? Are we seeing a replay of the early 1980s Mexico crisis? Okay, no response there. Okay, do we have any other questions? Oh, hang on. Okay. Any questions? No further questions. All right, so what I'd just like to do is just like to formally conclude our session today. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for some very interesting points made, making us much more conscious of some of the dilemmas that are being faced in different parts of the world and different responses to the actual pandemic crisis. Can I please encourage you all to take a look at the remaining program of the AHE conference this year. We have sessions on Thursdays and Friday all the way through July, concluding on the 31st. And so I would like to also take the opportunity to thank all of the attendees out there. Thank you very much for attending, and hope that you have an enjoyable rest of the day. So with that, I'd like to conclude the session. Would you like to add anything, Bruce?
No, thanks for bearing with us with new technical challenges.
Yes, yes, it's all a bit of a learning process, but thank you very much for all of your contributions, and wish you a very good day. So, bye-bye.